Replacing spark plugs on your motorcycle is a pretty simple job. Honestly, for a lot of bikes, the hardest part is just going to be getting to them in the first place. That varies quite a bit from bike to bike, so there's not really too much I can help you with there specifically. But, lucky for you, once you do get to the spark plugs, no matter what kind of bike you have, they're all pretty much the same. It's a good idea to begin by cleaning off the top of the engine. We don't want any debris to fall down inside once we have the spark plugs removed. Now, you can go ahead and disconnect and remove your ignition coils or spark plug boots. On my bike, my spark plugs are recessed down inside this spark plug well. It's a place for debris to be hanging out and another opportunity for junk to fall inside your engine. On mine, they're pretty clean, but if you look here on some bikes, yeah, they can be pretty dirty. So I highly recommend blowing them out with some compressed air before you take the plugs out. For actually removing the plugs, you're probably going to need a couple of extensions, maybe some swivels to get the angle right, and a spark plug socket, which is a little different from a regular socket because it has a rubber insert inside to grab the plug. That means usually, when you pull the socket out, the plug will come with it. If the spark plug doesn't want to come out with your socket, no biggie. A magnetic pickup tool works really well for this. Once you have the spark plugs out, it's a good idea to take a close look at them and note their condition. It can give you a good idea as to how your engine was running. There's a lot of useful charts on the internet for helping you to read spark plugs and recognize things like lean, rich, or burning oil, so I'll try and put something useful in the video description. Check that out if you're interested. I'm going to be replacing the spark plugs on my bike with the OEM spec plug, which for my bike is an NGK CR8E spark plug. Good thing about NGK plugs is they're usually gapped correctly right out of the box. The gap is the distance between these two electrodes, and it does need to be a specific distance for the plug to work properly. For example, the spec on my bike is 0.7 to 0.8 millimeters. And for checking and adjusting it, you use a spark plug gapping tool. These two ends are for adjusting the electrode to set the gap, and then the little wire gauges are for checking it. Usually on one side it'll be millimeters, and on the other side, thousandths of an inch. To use the gapping tool, select a size that's close to what your spec should be, and see if it fits. Don't be forceful or anything, either it fits or it doesn't, but if it's too big to fit, that means that your gap is smaller than the size you selected. Go down one and see if that one fits. If it does, that means your gap is either that size or somewhere between the two. You're looking for it to insert easily with just a slight drag. Usually that means it's spot on. If your gap is out of spec, go ahead and use the end of the spark plug gapping tool to adjust the ground electrode up or down to set your gap just right. Now, an example of what not to do would be to jam something between the two electrodes to adjust the gap. I know, it's tempting, but doing it this way can definitely cause damage to that center electrode. So yeah, don't do that. I also won't be putting anti-seize on these plugs, because for these NGK spark plugs and many others, it's completely unnecessary. I won't go off on a tangent about it, but if you're curious to read more, I'll try and put something in the video description for you to check out. It can be a controversial topic, so if you have an opinion about putting anti-seize on spark plugs, please let us all know what you think in the comment section down below. Now, the last thing I want to share with you before we put these plugs in is a little tip that can make it easier for installing them down in spark plug wells. And that's where you put a piece of rubber hose over the end of the plug that makes it much easier to get it started, rather than using a wrench. The rubber hose trick is nice because you can see what you're doing a lot easier, and you have much better feel for if it's cross-threading or not. The spark plug should thread in multiple times before it gets hand tight. If it starts and gets tight right away, it's probably cross-threaded, and you'll want to take it out and redo it so you don't strip the threads. Now, another way to strip the threads on your engine is by over-tightening the spark plugs. And if you've never done plugs before, they're probably not going to need to be as tight as you think they should be. So I definitely recommend finding out the torque specs and using a torque wrench. Stripping the threads on a spark plug is probably the easiest way to turn a simple job into a total nightmare. Also, if you're curious, you might want to check out what the manufacturer recommends. NGK, for example, puts a lot of good info on the back of their box for torque specs that they recommend, as well as some specs for how to tighten it if you don't have access to a torque wrench. And there you go. Once it's torqued, that one's done. Just repeat the same thing for the rest of them. From here on, it's pretty much smooth sailing. You just got to reinstall your ignition coils or spark plug boots, plug everything back in, and hook everything else back up, whatever you took off to get to them in the first place. And see, I told you replacing spark plugs wasn't all that hard. As long as you don't drop anything down in the engine or strip any threads, you'll be doing just fine. I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching, and good luck.